Here.
Senator Barker?
Yeah.
Senator Lewis? Senator Sugarline? Senator Cosgrove?
Okay, we need to get Delegate Landis out of here. He's got funny money work to do, I think.
No, I won't.
So Landis, get 2417 for us.
I've got backup from J-Law here with me. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2417 was the recommendations that came out of the J-Law report in 2012 looking at a Medicaid program. And simply put, what this bill would do would have DMAS, Department of Medical Assistance Services, establish a program to mitigate through the use of prepayment analytics the risk of improper payments to providers of services furnished under the state plan for medical assistance. The legislation would help DMAS identify and combat fraud, abuse, or errors, and further would permit DMAS to enter into a contract with a vendor to provide this service. And the gross version has, the House had some proposed technical amendments that we adopted, so that's what you have. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, there is money included in the House budget. You all did not have this bill, so obviously it's the first time the Senate's seen this. There's about $742,000 included in the House budget to fund this, and it is probably the last piece that was not kind of collected from that report in 2012 to try to reform our Medicaid program. We don't have many payment fee-for-service folks now. Most of it's in managed care. In other states that have done this, they did find obviously some savings, and that's what we're going after.
Are there any questions?
Let me say, I guess if we did this, we'd need to send it to finance. So.
Is anybody here speak in support of the bill? Anybody speak in opposition to this bill?
Yes, sir.
No, please.
With my apologies to Delegate Landis, because I didn't, in fact, catch this on the House side. Guys, my name is Jennifer Goodell. I represent Virginia Network of Private Providers, and I just want to say one additional thing to what Delegate Landis has already said. This did come out of the JLARC report. I think it was October 2011, actually got passed in 2012. There have been vast changes in the number of providers that are in managed care since then. And the only group that is left in this size at all are those that are providing DD waivers. So it's just those providers that are doing DD waiver work. There's a very small contingent, I understand, and someone didn't ask to clarify this, for family planning, very small, but the rest of them are all DD waiver providers. So this is, in fact, only going to be for those providers. And we are, at this point, I don't disagree with the theory of this. I know it's worked well in other states. This is, we are providers who virtually all of our services are pre-authorized by DMAS. So they are not services that we can simply independently choose to provide. These are services that are already pre-planned, if you will. And I'm not sure that it's maybe going to have the impact it would have had this been done back in 2000. So, thank you for this.
Mr. Chairman, if I could
yes, Senator Black. Just before we go on, I'm moving because I don't feel good. And I like these guys.
Thank you.
I don't want to give
And I appreciate the buffer here.
I'm just curious about the scope of this, listening to the testimony. I know Medicaid tends to be just an area of massive abuse nationally. Now, I don't speak to Virginia, but I know nationally. But I'm wondering, apparently this is a very narrow scope, is it correct?
Mr. Chairman, it would be Delegate Black. I can have Jeff, sorry, Senator Black. It's an old habit, as you all know. I could have Jeff address what JLARC found from the standpoint of what other states. We do think that there most providers probably are doing what they need to do. But the problem is you always find bad actors, and that's where the savings in the programs and the efficiencies is found. But Jeff could probably address from the JLARC report just what
Yes, and
what staff
before he
found.
does, I'm just curious why it's not broader. What caused you to focus on this particular segment of it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Black, we were going after fee-for-service, and really these are the only fee-for-service providers any longer. We have migrated everybody over to managed care. We're doing some other things related to managed care for efficiencies and the like, but this was the one last area for fee-for-service. And again, based on the JLARC study and what they found, we still believe that there'd be some savings.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff Lenardi with JLARC. I can just speak to Delegate Landis's point. The recommendation came out of the 2012 report, and just kind of a quick update. The concept has been kind of pushed by CMS over the years. They were required by Congress to implement a fraud protection system in Medicare, and they demonstrate a very strong return on investment in the Medicare space. As of July 2015, 12 states were implementing these sorts of tactics, and another 15 had indicated to CMS that they had plans to. CMS's most recent report has indicated that ROI is dependent on the size of a state's program. And so, I think Delegate Landis recognizes that, but the hope is certainly that there would be enough claims to run this against that some savings would still be possible.
And one more question, if I could. So the 742,000, we're fairly optimistic that our return will exceed our investment, or?
I think from a research standpoint, it's hard for me to say that given the time that has passed. One suggestion that could be attempted is to structure a contract with, because these are typically structure a contract on a recovery basis that's similar to the required recovery audits that are done in Medicaid to kind of prove that concept and transfer some of the risk to a contractor who may be doing this. So there may be ways to mitigate the state's risk that the savings may not outweigh the cost of implementation.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, we basically base that amount on what the FIS reported to make sure we at least cover those costs. I think it may be less. And again, DMAS would have the flexibility to let the contract and basically target towards payment analytics. What they do is they use computer algorithms to go after basically looking for fraud and abuse or errors. In some cases, just errors, either from the provider or on our end. So that's what the contract is.
Any other questions? Senator Barker.
One quick question. With this, given that there are a number of fee-for-service providers now, are you able to go back in time with this analysis, or will it only be capturing future payments?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd have to ask DMAS. That's a good question, Senator Barker. That's not a question that's come up before, but I think, I don't think the way the legislation. Yeah, I don't think with the legislation, the way it's drafted, I think there could be a look back in that standpoint.
Okay. Is there anybody here to speak for or against this bill? If not, a proper motion would be, if it was reported, would have to be report for finance.
I so move.
Second.
So moved and seconded that the recommend to be reported in Senate Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you feel better.
Dr. O'Bannon. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
What do you got for us today?
Senator Cosgrove, this is House Bill 2300. The problem, this is a pretty straightforward policy issue. The problem arose in an area of the state where, as the health department does many inspections, that there were some providers that thought that they were getting inspected more frequently than everybody else of their peers. And their concern was that was maybe a matter of convenience because they were close by, and the department had to do X number of inspections, and so they were sort of hit more than appropriate. We actually brought a bill, we worked with the department, and this bill, you'll see it's boilerplate language in each piece of what they inspect. whether it's EMS services or hospices or hospitals or hotels, but the language basically, the policy would be to know whatever service shall receive additional inspections until every other service has been inspected, unless, and then it carves out a number of good reasons why you ought to go back. Like there's a pre-operational inspection or violation that they want to follow up on, or there's some of these, like some of these have, nursing homes have CMS federal inspections that they get. All those are appropriately spelled out in the bill. And so we didn't find any opposition to this as a policy thing on the outside.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Black.
just a question. I guess I envision a situation where you've got some very small organization and some vast organization. And the vast organization probably should be inspected with much greater frequency than the very small one. Is that accounted for somehow in this?
I think there are provisions here that allow the last little 4 in each one of these gives the commissioner or his designee the opportunity to go back at any time and inspect one. But I think the principle is that everybody ought to be inspected, you know. And this has absolutely nothing to do with abortion clinics. That would not change. The health department will continue to have that process. Violations are found, violations are dealt with. This would simply put in the policy that there will be a process where everybody gets inspected on a routine basis.
Okay. Is there anybody here in the audience to speak to this bill? For the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Member Equity, Virginia Department of Health and Administration supports the bill.
Okay. Is there anybody here to speak against the bill? Hearing none, there's no fiscal impact on this. That's correct.
Move to recommend reporting.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to recommend reporting to full committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Let us know.
Thank you all very
Thank you,
much.
Doctor. Good to see you. Delegate Billerborn.
HB 2258. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is a simple, clear bill. It asks the Department of Behavioral Health and Department of Services, DBHDS, to report on its activities as it relates to suicide prevention by December 1st of this year. And this bill has taken on several different drafts and different amendments and changes. Obviously, the idea is to highlight an issue that's near and dear to many of our hearts, and what can we be doing more about highlighting this issue. We found out through after doing some research, that there actually was already a working group, a task force set up. So we kind of switched my focus to establishing this group and organizations, and including certain agencies that were not already included, to just merely asking that they report once we found out that they had not done so. There are several individuals, 2 in particular, I think, that are here from my district, my region, that would love the opportunity to share briefly, kind of have a full schedule as to
Yeah,
why this is important.
we still have to do that general ones. Until midnight.
Well,
No, they're welcome to. I just want to see.
Maybe very briefly, if that's the will of the chair.
Questions to the senator?
So as I understand, the already a requirement to report, and this basically just sets a deadline, is that?
Well, actually, they have not reported, and so this would require that HDS report on its activities as it relates to suicide prevention. And it does put in there a date, December 1st.
All right, folks would like to speak here? Oh, yes, sir, I'm sorry, Senator Barker.
The Department of Health came and reported to the Joint Healthcare Company. The Department of Health came and presented on they work with staff, or they don't know, they presented or work with staff of Joint Commission on Healthcare to do a presentation. But they don't do anything regular report.
There was no requirement and no follow-up with regard to their activities. So, in fact, a lot of the organizations and individuals that we spoke to that were not even aware that there actually was a task force.
All right, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, She also works with the Fairfax County Fire Department, and she is a survivor. She lost her niece a year and a half ago to suicide. This is a very personal issue for me because we lost a firefighter a year and a half ago. Nicole Bendador, if you may have seen her story in the news, she was missing for over a week. They found her in Shenandoah National Park. At that time, I made a personal commitment to myself. Now that I'm retired and I do have some time on my hands, it became very important to me that I try to do what I could to try to help with suicide advocacy. The delegate here, our connection is that she came to our Out of the Darkness walk, one of our fundraisers, and her family came to the walk itself, which is where we made the connection, and she became interested and she made a commitment to us that she would try to do what she could. So it's very important to me that we keep this subject in the forefront and having these discussions. What we know about suicide is that talking saves lives, like I told you in your office. By continuing these discussions, we can actually reduce the suicide rates. The fact that it's being discussed at the General Assembly is huge. We need to be able to take that momentum back to our communities, back to our schools, back to our law enforcement, back to our military. We lose 20 veterans a day by suicide. I personally find that number revolting. Our nation has to do something with that. I just had the opportunity this weekend to go to a forum that had to do with child sexual assault. We know that 33% of people who are raped, children who are raped, will have suicidal idealization. 13% will actually try to die. So anything that we can do at a state level to keep this discussion in the forefront is positive, and we make Virginia a stronger state for doing so. Thank you very much.
Would you like to say anything? Just here for support.
Thank you, yes.
Is there anybody else here who'd like to briefly speak in support of the bill? Anybody here to speak in opposition to this bill? All right, I do have one question. That is behavioral health and developmental services. Is there anybody here from them?
Mr. Chairman, seems like a reasonably modest proposal. I move that we report the bill.
Second.
All right, so moved and properly seconded that we recommend reporting House Bill 2258. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Senator Subcommittee votes aye. Five ayes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate. All right, Senator Borak, how are you?
Good at that, they call it work. Mr. Chairman, you know, there's a lot of it going around, sure is. Comfort comes in large. House Bill 2304, if we may, Mr. Chairman, first. Mr. Chairman, this is following along Delegate Landis. This is also part of the JLARC Medicaid study report, and then the key provisions in this first, one of the key deficiencies that was identified are the tremendous discrepancies in screening processes across the Commonwealth, as these are being done at local social services, and the uniform evaluation instrument isn't being utilized as appropriately. So that's primarily what the law change does. I've never had a bill, Mr. Chairman, in all fairness, that's had as many enactment clauses as this measure, but those are all, as we try to embody as many of the JLARC recommendations into this measure that can be affected administratively within DMAS and the other agencies, DSS and so forth. That's what the enactment clauses work to affect. The measure, as you see it, is largely, and I want to give kudos to all the stakeholders. We had a couple of different meetings where we got together in a conference room with DMAS, with JLARC folks, and the stakeholders, and most all the issues, I think, were ironed out. In all candor, there is still one measure of contention, and I will be offering that for the committee's consideration, but I will tell you that in so doing, that's where the point of contention still rests in a moment. The other factor, for full disclosure, if you do act favorably, we need to go to finance. It's in the House budget, but it is not in the Senate budget, so it would have to be resolved at that juncture.
So there is no Senate.
There is no Senate counterpart to this measure, so not unlike Delegate Landis as well, similar posture.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I do have, staff has drafted an amendment. The only real sticking point was getting into the whole blended rate reimbursement premise, and to try and resolve that matter when the measure went out of the Health Committee. It we had agreed to the language you see here in this enactment clause, the long and the short of it being, for lack of a better analogy, giving a glide path as we would get to that. It was offered by me to the folks in the work group, and come together kind of in the true spirit of compromise. Neither side liked it entirely. And so that's what HWI sent to House of Probes. At their juncture, they chose to take this language out, and that's why you see the bill as you see it today that came out of the House. But it's there before you, Mr. Chairman,
I think we have
for your consideration.
There may be a Scrivener error here. This says after line 131, there is no line 131 on the LIS version.
Mr. Chairman, that should be after line 130, beginning of line 131.
Let's go ahead and make that change.
So moved.
All right. That move to adoption of the amendment.
And I don't know if you want to hear testimony on the adoption before you consider it. That's up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Probably should.
I think J-Lark may oppose, as it were, and DMAS, I believe, opposes,
Okay.
but
The amendment.
the amendment. The other stakeholders like it.
Okay.
So there's the long.
Like to speak?
Sure, I guess I'll say Jeff Wright from J-Lark. This was a recommendation of the J-Lark report of just this past December that DMAS use a blended rate, which I believe they are planning to do as they launch their CCC Plus or MLTSS program. So the amendment would require them to change that in the near term before moving to that about 3 years from now. So while J-Lark is an independent legislative agency, doesn't oppose or support a particular piece of legislation, I'm happy to answer any questions regarding our report or its recommendation. No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Help me understand.
Sure.
So are you just dealing with, is this amendment dealing just with the timing of when you do the blended rate?
Primarily.
Primarily, it does also dictate some terms of how DMAS would structure the blended rate, if I'm reading it correctly.
DMAS, sorry. Senator Barkley.
I just want, what's the rationale in terms of how they structure it?
Of the timing. My objective in carrying this, and I think all of us recognize that the focus is we want to make sure the patient's going to be cared for properly. That's fundamental. Next to that, how do we then use the dollars most efficiently to ensure objective A is being addressed? What we've got to be careful of is that as we're going to a blended rate, which kind of incentivizes folks being moved to less costly, that we be careful that that doesn't become the driving factor above the primary care of the patient, what the patient care plan may dictate. The industry felt that having a transitional period and recognizing some time to gather the data to see where the best blended rate percentages should be, they may not be universal across the state, there are many different variables, was why the industry wanted kind of a slow approach to that. DMAS recognizing the fiscal implications, I think, and also as you go through contract negotiations, that's the time to be putting in this as a contract provision. So I understand both sides of the equation. And so that's, the industry frankly would like to never say, I think, probably a blended rate. But I think they acknowledge it's going to be coming. So, and I can't see behind me, but I presume they're probably nodding, yeah, we'd rather see no blended rate.
Well,
I think it's with that.
if we have any, first of all, any proponents and any advocates of this
Sure.
who'd like to speak in favor?
Sure, so I'm Stephanie, I represent our 8 Medicaid managed care plans. Thank you, first and foremost, to Delegate Aurora for all of the hard work and the stakeholders for coming together and agreeing to the language. We are not opposed to blended rates. What we're simply advocating for is a longer runway for implementation while we kind of sort through the clinical needs of our members during the CCC Plus contract implementation. So we're really just stretching out our timeline. The important thing to note is that the HWI version of what was passed included the 3 separate rate cells that is in the language before you today. There was no impact or there was no difference in the FIS. If you look at the fiscal impact statement between doing the the bill that was passed out of HWI, which included the 3 separate rate cells, and the fiscal impact that passed out of appropriations, which removed that language. So we're really not talking about, at least from a FIS standpoint, an impact. It's just a different way to do things, and we feel a best practice. Blended rates are something that we see in other markets, and we happily support, just with a little bit more time while we kind of get through implementation.
Can you define a blended rate?
Sure, so a blended rate, and we've got experts here that are willing to speak to that, so I defer to them. A blended rate is really taking a percentage of, looking across your population, so looking at your nursing facility population and those in the community-based setting, and making an assumption about how many of those nursing facility residents would be eligible to move back out into the community, and then developing a rate based on that percentage, if that makes any sense. Developing a rate for the member that is living in that nursing facility that we receive. So it incentivizes us to hit a certain percentage target, to move a certain percentage of those nursing facility residents back out into the community.
Okay, is there anybody else here who'd like to speak in support of this bill?
Well, let me just have
Senator Burke.
one question. When you say the fiscal impact statement shows no difference, is that simply because of the years that you're looking at? Is there a difference if you look at it longer term?
So my understanding is that the FIS went out until, I believe, 2023, is that correct? It went out quite a long ways, and the FIS showed, the fiscal impact was really speaking to about 3 enactments that were all accounted for full-time positions at DMAS.
So,
And please correct me if I'm
The
wrong.
fiscal impact being
Yeah.
on the administrative cost of DMAS, not necessarily on the Medicaid cost.
Correct.
Anybody work?
Is the FIS then, on the administrative cost to operate a program, the same?
It's the same with or without this
Up
amendment.
through 2023?
Right. The distinction comes, there may be differences in the actual Medicaid cost.
Right.
All right, is there anybody else here to speak in support of this bill? Anyone speak in opposition to the bill? Yes, sir.
Senator Bill Massar, Director of Provider Reimbursement at BMAS, not in opposition to the bill, but wanted to explain what we decided to do based on the recommendations from JLARC, who were very strong in encouraging us to do a blended rate to provide a financial incentive, not just to move people from nursing homes to home community-based care, but to divert people who might have gone to a nursing home to home community-based care before they even get into a nursing home. This recommendation builds off of CMS's strong encouragement to use financial incentives in this manner, and their consultant, Mercer actuarial firm, recommended it. So we had all this strong recommendation, so we incorporated into the rates that we finalized, and 6 plans have signed contracts with those rates that go into effect in August. It doesn't have a fiscal impact because it's not really, at this point in time, not that strong. It's not going to be difficult at all to reach those requirements. We're putting in place the structure that we is appropriate based on the recommendations we've gotten. The only thing I would say is that at this late date, this is, it disrupts the implementation of a plan that we've got already in line to go in place in August.
Thank you. Anybody else to speak? Senator Burke.
Quick question. When you say it disrupts, is it the bill disrupts or the proposed 14?
We've got to change our rate structure.
Right.
Got to re-sign contracts. We've got to make sure that we have all the system in place to do so. Probably is okay, but it's not something, we've been doing a lot in trying to get up by August as a big project without having to change in plans at this time.
And so what you're concerned about is the 14th enactment clause proposed, not the rest of the bill? Okay.
For the amendment.
Yeah, okay, correct.
You want to speak?
No, I was just affirming that, yes, sir. My name is Karen Kimsey. I'm with the Department of Medical Assistance Services.
Very well. anybody else speak for or against the bill? All right, hearing none. Is there a motion from the subcommittee?
I guess I have a question. I mean, do we need to delete the 14th?
Well, we
We
have not
haven't-
adopted it
Not
yet,
adopted yet.
Right.
so
Okay.
that's the matter of opinion.
This is the 14th here?
Yes, sir.
Whatever the motion is, it's going to have to go to finance.
Um,
And, Mr. Chairman, if you're in finance, maybe you can, if they want to put in an amendment, it's fine. I think in the wisdom of the subcommittee, we probably just don't want to do that right now.
And I wanted to offer it, and let y'all get the policy question before you just went on and go.
So the bill is, as it came in from the House, is before us.
And in that posture, Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any opposition to the measure.
Okay, yeah, this came up unanimously in the House.
I'm going to recommend according to the full committee.
And then refer it.
And refer to finance, I'll second that.
Okay, properly moved and seconded that this bill recommended being reported and referring to finance. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Delegate Seaman votes aye by proxy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. You could give your attention to 2477.
This one easy.
I think so. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, 2477 was brought to me by the department based on a study that they did this past year with a total of 20 different recommendations as a result of the study relating to septic systems and on-site well placement. Of the 20, there were 8 recommendations that could be affected through the administrative process. The other 12 will take legislative changes. This measure is a Section 1 bill to embody those 8 changes. The general premise behind them is to put the department in a posture where it's more privatization involved in the process, and the state becomes more the provider of last resort, but where the private industry of the septic system designs, soil scientists and engineers would be more independent, but still with the state there to verify for the health concerns. That's the long and the short of the measure. We've worked out the languages. To my knowledge, I haven't received any contacts of opposition since the bill came out of the House. We did add an enactment clause where they would, 2 things we did in the House. We would slow the process down somewhat to say begin eliminating, not carte blanche eliminate, and have them do a reporting back to the General Assembly next fall as to how things are going in this process.
Is this similar to Senator?
I don't think. I think
This was a different.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay, the questions of Delegate Arrock on this bill. All right, is there anybody here to speak in support of the bill? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Alan Knapp from the Department of Health Administration supports the bill.
Great. Okay. Is there anybody to speak in opposition to the bill? All right.
Move to report.
Senator Barton. Sure.
As I skim through this here, what would be done, if I'm reading correctly, is that you would move towards trying to encourage people to look for private options where those are available, but the department will continue to provide the services where they're not available.
Or if the consumer didn't want to go the private route, they may have to wait a little longer, but then the department will still be providing those services, yes.
Thank you.
Senator Lewis.
Delegate Orr, is this, I've just got my folder here, is this, was it changed over from, as it was introduced on the House side? Did you?
The only changes, we slowed things down and took away, initially it would say they would eliminate, and begin eliminating has been put in place. And it would separate work unit functions, and we changed that to consider separating work unit functions. And we also added the reporting back requirement on the implementation status next fall.
Okay. We've heard the bill.
Move to report.
Second.
Has been moved and properly seconded to report House Bill 2477. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Here's that petition.
Yeah, delegates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
Take care,
committee.
Delegate. Senator Susan will stay. If you want to check this. Delegate Peace.
Thank you, Senator.
How are you?
I'm well, you are. Hope everyone is. It's
Okay,
almost
what's
5
up?
o'clock, just.
I still have to go to general law stuff too.
Well, and God bless you. I have House Bill 1944. It was an amendment named yourselves as you passed the House. There are components of this bill that have been previously acted upon favorably by your Senate general laws, and that relates to the provision regarding BPD and the economic impact analysis, taking private sector comment as that process unfolds. The rest of the bill deals with when there are proposed new regulations or changes to provider manuals or changes to licensure requirements, that behavioral health providers would be given the opportunity for public input into the process that would potentially affect their industries. And this language was actually worked out through some consensus with DBHDS, DMAS, and the governor's office, counsel to the governor. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but the basic premise is when the government is changing its rules, generally speaking, and there are private providers that may be affected, we hope that the government would entertain their comments and suggestions through any of those processes. And I don't believe there's any objection to the legislation that I'm aware of.
Let's find out.
Really
Any
not.
questions of Delegate Peace before I ask the audience? Okay. Is there anybody here to speak in support of the bill?
Karen Addison for Caliber, Virginia, which is an association of behavioral health providers, and we are definitely in support of the bill.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else to speak in support of the bill? Anybody in opposition to the bill? Anybody care about the bill? Yes.
8 million Virginians.
That's right. Okay.
We all have to take.
That's right. All right, heard the bill, sounds like a common sense issue.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Recommend report.
Okay, who's gonna do this one second?
No, sir.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we recommend reporting House Bill 1944. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Delegate Sugarline,
Do we look alike? He's taller.
yeah, you want all.